It was nearly midnight at Riverbend General Hospital. Most of the patients were asleep, the halls were quiet, and the night shift staff moved with a steady, relaxed rhythm. The air was calm, even peaceful, until the automatic doors at the emergency entrance slid open, seemingly on their own. At first, no one noticed. The security guard on duty glanced up from his monitor, then blinked in confusion. A large shadow moved across the entrance lobby. It wasn't a person, it was a dog. A massive German shepherd, dripping wet from the rain, stepped inside with slow, deliberate movements. His fur was matted, and his eyes were sharp with purpose. In his mouth, gently clutched between his jaws, was something wrapped in what looked like an old flannel shirt. The guard rushed forward, unsure if the animal was dangerous, but then he froze. The bundle in the dog's mouth twitched. It moved. Within seconds, a nurse coming down the hallway screamed for help. The flannel shirt fell away just enough to reveal a tiny hand, no bigger than the length of a finger. A baby. The German shepherd laid the infant down on the cold hospital floor and took a step back, his tail still, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Chaos erupted in the ER. Doctors and nurses swarmed in, scooping up the baby and shouting out vitals. A crash cart was wheeled into the room. The infant was unresponsive, pale, and freezing. No one had any idea who the child was or where they had come from, and no one could quite believe how they had arrived. The dog remained just outside the room, standing in the middle of the emergency department, soaked and shivering. But he didn't look scared. He looked focused. He wasn't trying to run, growl, or escape. He simply watched the baby. A paramedic approached with caution and noticed something remarkable. The dog's mouth had left no bite marks, no injuries, just gentle dampness from his fur. Whoever this animal was, he had carried the baby as carefully as if it were his own. A nurse whispered under her breath, "I think he saved her." By now, hospital staff had called animal control, the police, and the media. But none of them could offer an explanation more powerful than the sight before them. A lone German shepherd, standing guard over a baby he had brought to safety in the middle of the night. And this was only the beginning. As the minutes ticked by, the urgency in the emergency room grew. The baby, a fragile little girl, was rushed onto a bed where doctors worked frantically to stabilize her. The coldness that gripped her tiny body was dangerously low, her skin pale and clammy. The infant's heartbeat was weak, her breathing shallow and irregular. Every second counted, and the team of nurses and doctors knew it. Despite the frantic pace inside the ER, a quiet calm settled over the German shepherd just outside the door. He hadn't budged from his spot, his ears perked and his eyes never leaving the small figure in the bed. He had sensed the danger the moment he had arrived at the hospital, and now, as the baby's life hung in the balance, he stood still like a silent guardian. Claire, a pediatric nurse, moved quickly, adjusting the oxygen mask over the baby's face. The little one's tiny chest began to rise and fall more steadily, though not enough to relax anyone. She glanced toward the dog, still standing motionless by the door, his eyes fixed on the baby. Something about the scene stirred a feeling inside her, an unspoken bond, as though the dog had a deep connection to the infant. "Is he hers?" Claire asked one of the other nurses who was also watching the dog. "I don't think so," the nurse replied, looking baffled. "We have no idea where this baby came from, but she sure didn't arrive like any normal child. That dog, he's not just some stray. He knows what he's doing." Meanwhile, the rest of the hospital team worked quickly to assess the baby's condition. She was severely dehydrated, and though she appeared malnourished, there were no major signs of abuse. The ER doctor, Dr. Pierce, ordered fluids to be administered immediately and antibiotics just in case. But the most pressing concern was her body temperature. It had dropped dangerously low, almost to hypothermic levels. "Keep her warm," Dr. Pierce instructed. "We've got to get her temperature up first. This is a race against time." As the medical team scrambled to stabilize the baby, the German shepherd never moved. He continued to watch, unwavering, his body still shivering from the cold, but his attention fixed on the life that hung in the balance. No one knew how or why he had brought the baby here, but it was clear. He was determined not to let her slip away. Outside, the rain continued to fall, the storm still raging, but in that room, something extraordinary had already begun to unfold. The hours passed, but the German shepherd remained exactly where he had stood, his large frame blocking the entrance to the emergency room. He didn't growl or bark, but there was a constant restlessness in his eyes. His tail occasionally flicked, but it never wagged. The dog's focus was entirely on the small life being tended to inside. Nurses and doctors came and went, but no one dared approach him. They could all sense the deep connection between the dog and the baby, even if no one had the answers as to how or why it existed. He wasn't just some stray animal looking for shelter. He was more than that. He had come here for a reason, and everyone could feel it. At one point, Claire, the pediatric nurse, was tasked with taking a break. She walked out of the ER, exhausted from the constant care she had been providing. But as she passed by the waiting area, she saw the dog again, sitting near the entrance, his gaze unwavering. There was something profound in his eyes, something that tugged at her heart. It wasn't just concern, it was a silent promise. She stopped and looked at him, puzzled. "You're not leaving, are you?" she whispered, though she wasn't sure what she was expecting in response. The dog let out a soft whine, then stood up, his large body filling the space. Claire noticed how carefully he moved, as though he was aware of every step he took, making sure not to get in anyone's way. His attention was only on the baby. Claire hesitated. She had dealt with a lot of animals in her career, but never one like this. It wasn't just that he was protective. He was steadfast, determined. He was more than a dog. He was a protector. She turned to one of the doctors in the hallway. "I think he needs to stay with her," Claire said, her voice low but firm. "He's not going to leave her side." The doctor nodded, though he seemed unsure. "We're not sure who he is, or if he's dangerous. We've called animal control, but we can't leave the baby alone." Claire took a deep breath. She understood the concern, but something inside her told her that this dog wasn't a threat. He was part of the baby's story, whether anyone realized it yet or not. She knelt down beside the dog, extending her hand cautiously. He didn't flinch or growl. Instead, he gently leaned forward, his nose sniffing her hand, then nudging it lightly, as if giving her permission to approach. "He's not leaving," Claire said softly, more to herself than anyone else. "And I don't think we should make him." And with that, she stood up, resolved to let the dog remain. Something told her that this was only the beginning of a bond none of them could have predicted. The morning after the baby's arrival at the hospital, the entire building was still buzzing with activity. The ER staff continued to monitor the little girl, now stable, and doctors were trying to figure out who she was and how she had come to them. But it wasn't just the baby who had everyone talking. The German shepherd, now known simply as Max, refused to leave. He had been allowed to stay in a small corner of the hospital's waiting area, but that didn't stop him from watching the door to the infant's room. His eyes were fixed on the entrance, never leaving the baby for more than a moment. Around noon, animal control finally arrived to assess the situation. Officers had arrived early that morning to try and locate any sort of identification on the dog, but there was nothing. No collar, no microchip, just the dog and his clear, protective instinct toward the baby. "They're inseparable," Claire told the animal control officer, her voice quiet. "I don't think he's going anywhere." The officer nodded, taking note. "We'll run his description, but I've never seen a dog act this way before. It's like he's guarding her." It was when the search team began looking deeper into the dog's movements that things took a surprising turn. They decided to trace the dog's path from the hospital to where he had appeared the previous night. Armed with trained trackers and a few volunteers, the group set out to follow Max's muddy paw prints through the city. The trail led them through a dense thicket of woods where the path grew thicker and harder to follow. But Max had left clear marks in the mud, prints that showed exactly where he had walked. It was as if he knew exactly where he was going, and the tracks seemed to be a direct path to something. What, though, no one could guess. An hour into the search, The group finally reached an isolated farmhouse, its paint peeling and windows boarded up. The area was eerily quiet, as though it had been abandoned for some time. But inside, the scene was far from empty. It was clear someone had been living here recently. Scattered around the house were empty bottles of baby formula, half-eaten food wrappers, and blankets that had seen better days. In one corner, a small hand-drawn picture of a woman holding a baby and a German shepherd at her side sat on the floor. As the searchers gathered around the image, one of the officers found something even more revealing. A diary, its pages filled with notes from a woman named Emily. It seemed Max had led them to her, a mother whose story was about to change everything. As the searchers pieced together the evidence in the abandoned farmhouse, a chilling sense of realization settled over them. The diary, which had been carefully tucked away in a drawer, revealed a heartbreaking account. The woman who had written it was named Emily, and her story was both tragic and poignant. Emily's entries described a difficult life, one filled with hardship and fear. She had run away from a tumultuous home, hoping to find peace for herself and her newborn daughter. Max, the German shepherd, had been her brother's loyal companion before he passed away. When Emily had nowhere else to turn, Max had become more than just a dog. He had become her protector, the only constant in her life. The diary's final entry was written just days before the baby had been brought to the hospital. Emily's handwriting was shaky, the words stained with what appeared to be tears. "I'm so tired," the entry read. "The cold is unbearable, and I can feel myself getting weaker. I know I'm not going to make it, but I can't leave her alone. Max, please take care of her. Find someone who can help." The pain and love in her words were undeniable. Emily knew she was running out of time, and in her last moments, she had placed all her trust in Max. Her plea was simple but filled with the kind of desperation only a mother could understand. The team, now fully grasping the depth of the situation, searched the rest of the farmhouse. They found more clues: empty baby clothes, a crib that had never been used, and a few more items that confirmed Emily's desperate struggle to survive. It was clear she had been living here alone with her daughter for several weeks, trying to make the best of an impossible situation. Max had stayed by her side throughout it all. The bond between them had been forged in loyalty, survival, and love. And now, with Emily gone, Max had fulfilled her final wish. He had brought her daughter to safety, even if it meant risking his own life to do so. At that moment, the officers and volunteers realized they had found more than just a missing persons case. They had uncovered a story of devotion that transcended everything, one that would soon capture the hearts of an entire community. As the sun began to set, the search team made their way back to the hospital, their minds heavy with the weight of Emily's story. Meanwhile, in the ER, the baby, still unknown to the world, lay in the care of the doctors and nurses who were fighting to keep her alive. The discovery of Emily's diary spread through the small town like wildfire. The media caught wind of the story, and soon the hospital was flooded with calls. People wanted to know who the baby was, where she had come from, and most of all, they wanted to know about Max, the German shepherd who had brought her to safety. It didn't take long for the community to adopt Max as a hero. News outlets shared his story, and soon, social media was buzzing with posts about the dog who had saved a life. People marveled at his courage and loyalty, but there was something even more remarkable about him. It wasn't just that Max had found the baby. It was that he had carried her to the hospital, as if he had known exactly what he was doing. At the hospital, Max remained by the baby's side, never straying far. Doctors and nurses now called him the protector, and no one could bring themselves to ask him to leave. His presence had become a symbol of something larger than just a rescue. Max had given the baby a second chance, and everyone in the hospital knew it. The little girl, who had been unnamed for days, was finally given a name: Hope. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. She was still fragile, but her condition had improved. She was strong, a fighter, just like Max. Claire, the pediatric nurse who had bonded with Hope, was moved by the dog's devotion. She spent her days caring for the infant and her nights sitting with Max, watching over the baby as he did. There was something calming about the way Max never left the room. It was as if he was waiting, guarding, making sure Hope would survive. One afternoon, a local reporter asked Claire if Max had been a trained service dog, wondering if his actions were a result of his former career as a police K-9. Claire paused for a moment, watching the dog as he lay quietly by Hope's crib. "I don't think it's about training," Claire replied thoughtfully. "I think it's about love. Max isn't just a dog. He's a protector, and he did exactly what he was meant to do." The more people learned about Max, the more they admired him. Donations poured in to support Hope's medical bills, and offers to adopt her came from every corner of the town. But Claire knew that Hope was already part of something special. Max had already claimed his place as her guardian, and no one could take that away. As Max's story gained national attention, a community found itself bound by the silent bond between a dog and baby. And in the middle of it all, Max, the hero, was exactly where he belonged, by Hope's side. As the weeks passed, Max's bond with Hope only grew stronger. Claire, who had been spending most of her time with the baby, began to feel an unspoken connection between them all, Max, Hope, and herself. There was a certain stillness to their little trio, a quiet harmony that had formed despite the circumstances that brought them together. Claire had always dreamed of being a mother, but life had not been kind in that regard. She and her husband had tried to adopt for years, but their plans had fallen apart after a tragic loss. The grief had been unbearable, and she wasn't sure she would ever recover from it. But then came Hope, and then came Max. Max's loyalty to Hope was undeniable, but it was also clear to Claire that he had adopted her into his heart just as much as she had. Max was no longer just a dog who had brought a baby to safety. He was a part of her family, and his devotion to Hope had turned Claire's life upside down in the most unexpected way. One evening, as Claire sat with Hope in her arms, Max lay beside her on the couch, his head resting on her feet. The baby, now a little stronger, cooed in Claire's arms, kicking her tiny legs and reaching for the dog. It was a peaceful scene, but Claire couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Max had been with Hope from the very beginning, but it wasn't just the dog who had been by her side. It was Claire too. And in that moment, Claire realized what she had to do. The decision was difficult, but it was clear. She had lost so much over the years, and now she was being given a chance to rebuild her life. But Hope wasn't just a second chance for her. She was a second chance for Max too. Max had given everything for Hope, and in return, Claire wanted to give them both the family they deserved. After a long day of work, Claire sat in the living room, a few papers spread out before her. She looked down at the adoption papers in front of her and smiled as Hope smuggled against her. She filled out the final paperwork and wrote down a name that meant everything to her now. "I'm going to make it official," she whispered, looking at Max, who lifted his head as if he understood. The adoption process was quick, and soon, Max and Hope were officially part of Claire's family. They were no longer just a woman and a dog. They were a family, a story of love, survival, and second chances. It had been months since Max and Hope had been officially adopted by Claire. The little girl, once fragile and uncertain, had blossomed into a joyful, vibrant toddler. She laughed easily, her smile infectious, and her bright eyes sparkled with an energy that filled the home. Max, ever loyal, remained her steadfast companion, always watching over her with a protective yet gentle nature. Claire had learned to let go of the pain she had carried for so long. Hope's presence had brought healing in ways she never imagined possible. It wasn't just Hope's bright future that mattered, it was the family they had become together. Max had brought them together, but it was the bond they shared now that made them inseparable. Their home, once filled with sorrow, was now full of life. Claire and Max had built a rhythm, a routine that centered around Hope's needs, their shared moments of joy, and the small, daily acts of love that kept their family whole. One afternoon, Claire was sitting on the porch with Hope on her lap, watching Max run in the yard. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over everything. Hope clapped her hands, excitedly pointing at the dog as he bounded back and forth. Max, ever the protector, made sure to keep an eye on them, both as if to say, "I've got this. You're safe." As Claire watched the scene unfold, she couldn't help but think back to the day when she first met Max at the hospital. She remembered the way he had stood there, guarding Hope with such determination, and how that simple act had started a chain of events that had transformed all their lives. She knew that without Max, none of this would have been possible. Without his unwavering loyalty, Hope might not have made it that night, and Claire might still be lost in her own grief. But now, they were all together, and it felt like they had always been meant to be a family. Over time, Max had become a local hero. People often stopped by to meet the dog who had saved a life, and he was celebrated in the community. But for Claire, he would always be more than a hero. He was her protector, the dog who had given her a second chance at motherhood, and the loyal companion who had made her feel whole again. Max, Hope, and Claire had found something special, a love that had been tested by hardship but had triumphed in the end, and together they were unstoppable.